So diyan mali na sila. At hindi dapat tayo sumunod sa ganyang pamamalakad na walang konsultasyon at it somehow breaks the separation of church and state.
Strong words from Bishop Roderick Pabilio of the Archdiocese of Manila. In a pastoral letter, he says Manila churches will still hold religious worship at 10% capacity despite a ban from the IATF.
But the palace said the IATF resolution banning mass gatherings, including religious activities, is beyond religious freedom. They're not discounting the possibility of shutting down churches. Good evening, I'm Gretchen Hall.
And I am Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. We begin tonight with some Catholic bishops defying the government's order that would prohibit all public mass gatherings, including those religious in nature.
Bishops are asking, why are business establishments like malls allowed to operate while churches are asked to close? Mobile journalist Jacob Lazaro gives us the front seat to that big story.
Every year, Jonathan travels from Bulacan to the Quiapu Church as part of her Lenten pilgrimage. This year, with the new protocols in place, she wonders if the church will even be open.
Malungkot kasi traditional na since yung bata kami, talagang every year yan, kasama pa ng mga parents namin. Talagang iniikot namin ng lahat ng ganitong simbahan, yung matatandang simbahan.
On Monday, the Interagency Task Force, or the IATF, banned all mass gatherings, including religious gatherings, to stem the rising cases of COVID-19. But the order comes just a week before the Lenten season, the holiest time in the Catholic calendar. And some of the bishops are defying the order. Manila Archdiocese Administrator Bishop Roderick Pabilio says the church was not bound to follow a rule where the church was not even consulted.
So diyan mali na sila. At hindi dapat tayo sumunod sa ganyang pamamalakad na walang konsultasyon at it somehow breaks the separation of church and state.
Caloocan Bishop Pablo David asked why church services were banned when gyms and spas were initially allowed to operate. David says the order also violates religious freedom. Bishop Pabilio says Manila churches will still hold services, but at 10% capacity.
Actually, we restrict ourselves to 10%. No, because they themselves, they said that there should be no mass gatherings. I don't even know what kind of mass gatherings those are. Why do they say only religious activities should have no mass gatherings? What about in the malls?
Pabilio added that if the government thought it important to give the economy some breathing space, it should also allow for the public's spiritual needs.
They tend to say that because of the spread of the virus, but are not the malls also part of those? No, so why do they allow them to the malls, the restaurants, and not to the church? And we always say that the church activities are essential activities. They are not economic activities. We have also a spiritual need.
Palace spokesperson Harry Roque said religious freedom wasn't the issue. Roque added that the government can shut down the churches if it needs to, but hoped it would not come to that.
Ang defiance po ng IATF resolution is not covered by separation of church and state. What is covered is the freedom to believe and the freedom not to endorse a religion. Pero in the exercise of police powers, we can order the churches closed. Wag sana pong dumating doon, Bishop Pabilio.
Religion is deeply embedded in the Filipino culture and is just as important as our health and the economy. So the most important thing is that we learn how to balance them. I'm Jacob Lazaro and we are One News.
The Philippines now expects to receive millions of COVID shots before the month ends, and the government assures more supplies are on the way. Tonight's big number, 152 million. That is the number of doses expected to be delivered by year-end, at least according to the latest report by vaccine czar Carlito Galvez. That would include 25 million doses of Sinovac. The private sector and the local governments are also expecting 17 million AstraZeneca doses by May. Under secured agreements, the national government will bring in 13 million Moderna shots, another 7 million for the private sector. As for Novavax, 30 million doses have been purchased, with the private sector and LGUs getting an additional 15 million. Government is also set to sign supply agreements for 5 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine and for 15 million doses of Gamaleyas. Negotiations are still underway, meanwhile, for 25 million Pfizer doses. Now let's get back to our top story on the Archdiocese of Manila's decision to still hold religious gatherings to clear up their IATF order. We have with us National Task Force Deputy Chief Implementer Vince Dizon. Secretary Vince, welcome to the big story.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Robbie.
Okay,
Good evening, Gretchen.
Sorry, let's be clear here first. Is there any confusion as to what is allowed, not allowed under these more restricted quarantine measures with respect to religious gatherings? What exactly is the protocol here?
I think the additional restrictions are very clear. Mass gatherings, including religious gatherings of any sort, are not allowed. Hindi po pwede. Hindi po pwede munang magmisa, hindi po pwede munang yung usual na ginagawa natin during Holy Week. Ito po mahirap. Alam po namin na napakahirap po nito, lalo na pa sa ating mga kababayan at lalo na sa ating mga kababayang Katoliko. Tulad ko po, no, ako isang Katoliko, sanay po tayong magsinakulo, sanay po tayong mag-attend ng services ng Holy Thursday, Good Friday, at yung salubong sa Easter Sunday. Pero po, para lang po talaga magtulong-tulong tayo na mapababa itong mga kaso at hindi na lalo pang lumala ang sitwasyon, talaga pong sana mag-virtual na lang po muna tayo.
Sige, so doon po tayo sa punto ng ilang mga obispo. Bakit daw po hinahayaan yung mga malls, yung mga to operate at reduced capacity? And bakit naman yung pagsisimba? Hindi, given especially that they're saying 10% lang naman yung capacity na hinihingi namin.
Ang basis po ng lahat ng desisyon po ng IATF ay base sa mga rekomendasyon po ng mga eksperto. At ang sabi po ng mga eksperto, yung ating pong mga doktor at mga ibang eksperto sa Technical Advisory Group, na ang isa sa mga pinakadelikadong sitwasyon ay yung pagsasama-sama sa isang lugar ng ating mga kababayan. No? So, kaya po talagang given yung mga na-experience din natin nung mga nakaraang buwan tulad ng mga religious gatherings nung Pebrero at nung January, minarapat po ng ating mga eksperto na irekomenda na wag munang mag-allow ng mass gathering. Tulad din po ng ginawa ng mga ilang bansa. So, ito po ang basehan noon. At dalawang linggo lang naman po, kaya lang po, tatama po talaga ng Holy Week. So, humihingi po talaga tayo ng paumanhin at pasensya sa lahat ng ating mga kababayan, pati na rin sa ating mga obispo at ang ating mga pare na sana po magsama-sama na lang po tayo dito at mag-virtual po muna tayo.
Secretary Dizon, sinabi na nga po ni Presidential Spokesman Harry Roque, sana naman hindi umabot doon. Pero kung talagang magtutuos, how will you implement a lockdown? I mean, are you anticipating that you will have to block people's access to churches? Are you anticipating na baka kailangan magkandado ng mga simbahan?
Wag naman po sana, no? Hindi naman po natin gustong mangyari yon. Pero kailangan din pong ipatupad ng Estado ang mga pinrescribe niyang mga regulasyon. At ngayon po, klaro po ang regulasyon, hindi po pwede talaga ang mass gathering. Ito po ay suportado ng mga eksperto, ito din po ay suportado ng ating mga local chief executives sa NCR at sa ibang mga probinsya na covered nitong additional restrictions na ito. Sana naman po wag na at magtulong-tulong na lang po tayo dito.
Okay. National Task Force Deputy Chief Implementer Secretary Vince Dizon, maraming salamat po.
These are the other big stories tonight. After government's initial declaration that they will still be allowed to operate, gyms, spas, and internet cafes in Metro Manila are now ordered shut in the next 2 weeks. Despite signing a law providing ₱500 million indemnity fund, the president said the government could not assume liability for any adverse effects in vaccination. And a touchdown Emden Deep. A Filipino scientist just made history after reaching the third deepest part on Earth at more than 10,000 meters. These big stories after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. In his Monday night address, the president said government cannot shoulder liability for any adverse effects in vaccination. But it was the president himself who had approved the very measure that created an indemnity fund barely a month ago. Maricel Halili with the details.
Back in February, President Duterte signed into law Republic Act 11525 or the COVID-19 Vaccination Program Act. It expedites vaccine procurement and allots a 500 million peso indemnity fund should there be adverse effects from jabs. But in his address Monday night, the president seemed clueless about signing the measure.
The government cannot guarantee, much less give you an immune status na you are freed of any and all liability. Masyadong mataas na.
He even questioned the legality of spending government money to protect vaccine makers.
Gobyerno magbayad, I do not think that it will be legal. Sabihin mo, it's illegal for us to do that. Ang makagawa lang yan is Congress. Wala nang iba.
Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque clarified the president is against blanket immunity, not the indemnification agreement.
Yung sinabi naman po ni Presidente na hindi naman po pwede na walang pananagutan ng pribadong sektor, ito po ay dahil nakasaad nga po sa batas natin na bagamat gobyerno magbabayad ng mga side effects, may dalawang exceptions po dito. Kung nagkaroon po ng tinatawag na willful neglect o yung tinatawag na gross negligence.
Vaccine czar Carlito Galvez admitted that the government has yet to seal its indemnity agreement with Pfizer.
May mga tinatawag tayong legal views ng Pfizer Group at saka yung ating legal. So sa ngayon, pinaplansya po yun.
But he said Pfizer is still committed to deliver 25 million doses. Given these issues, some senators called on the abolition of the Interagency Task Force or IATF for alleged incompetence with vaccine procurement. The palace says the IATF is crucial for the pandemic response.
Ang IATF hindi po isang tao, hindi isang ahensya. Lahat po ng ahensya ng gobyerno pinagsama-sama. Napakadami pong talinong mga matatalinong Pilipino na nagsama-sama para nga po humanap ng solusyon.
For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
The government has recalled an order that would have allowed partial operations among gyms, spas, and internet shops during the 2-week bubble. Palace spokesman Harry Roque said Metro Manila mayors have reached a consensus to temporarily close such establishments until April 4. Economic Planning Chief Carl Chua flagged the potential losses due to the NCR Plus bubble. He said NCR and adjacent areas will lose 700 million pesos in wages per day under GCQ. It might also result in more than 128,000 going jobless. Chua is projecting a 2 billion peso lost income for these areas under tighter restrictions.
Amid rising cases in the country, Pampanga beefs up its restrictions via a house lockdown. What does that entail? JC Cosico tells us.
At the boundary of Columpit, Bulacan and Napalit, Pampanga, policemen halt motorists for inspection. Only residents and essential workers will be allowed entry.
Taga dun kayo?
This collector from Malolos City was asked to return after failing to show some documents.
May ano po ba kayo dun sa pinagtatrabahuan nyo? May papel kayo?
May papel dito, hindi ko pa nadala.
Sir, kuha muna kayo ng certificate nyo.
Roji from San Fernando City has to content himself with observing Holy Week online instead of joining relatives in Mexico, Pampanga.
Gusto kong magbakasyon dito dahil wala nang pasok. Kaya lang, wala, hindi pwede. Bawal.
Pampanga has heightened its restrictions following a surge of cases nationwide. Its Public Information Office has reported nearly 9,000 cases, about 1,000 of which are active. They have no cases yet of foreign variants. Barangay San Agustin in San Fernando has over 30 active cases, one of the highest in the city. From an average daily caseload of 25, Pampanga has now reached 120 since last Thursday.
Yung mga tao masyado na naging relax ba? Yung mga family gathering nagsimula na naman, kaya kung titignan mo yung mga tinatamaan, pamilya-pamilya eh.
Governor Dennis Pineda implemented a household lockdown from March 20 to April 5. This prohibits households from accepting guests. Non-residents may still enter the province as long as they present negative swab results taken within 72 hours. Only 2 adult residents may be allowed to leave.
Discourage namin talaga yung mga gatherings muna within residence na salo-salo, birthday o ano, huwag muna.
Barangay officials will monitor the situation on the ground.
Wala ka pa 18, di ba? O, 17. Bawal yan.
There will be curfew hours from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. A liquor ban will also be in place. For News 5, JC Cosico, we are One News.
Time for our next look at some of the day's big stories. After months of calls to address security issues, the Supreme Court condemns the killings, threatening and red tagging of lawyers and judges. The High Court said a threat on a lawyer is an assault on the judiciary. As a course of action, the SC said it will request courts and law enforcers to provide information on every threat and killing of a lawyer or judge in the past 10 years. From today's Senate hearing, 3 trafficked Filipinas in Syria alleged that immigration officers were paid to help them exit the country even without proper documentation. Witnesses from the Bureau of Immigration claim those operating the inbound Pastilla scam were the same officers involved in the trafficking of Filipino women. And it's a historic day for the science community as Filipino oceanographer Deo Florence Onda has successfully reached the Earth's 3rd deepest spot. Onda is the first and only Filipino to have descended more than 10,000 meters into the Emden Deep in the Philippine Trench. The Caladan Oceanic asked Onda to join the expedition aboard the DSV Limiting Factor. Time for another quick break when we return. From 220, a latest aerial inspection in the West Philippine Sea spotted 183 Chinese vessels at the Julian Felipe Reef. And a tricycle driver wanted to pull off a great escape after hitting a motorcycle. But running away is too mainstream. So what did he do? Find out after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. Magellan has always been widely credited with history's first circumnavigation, but with the 500th anniversary of his place in history comes several accounts suggesting another man could have circled the globe before him. Mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez explains.
Did you know that a man from Southeast Asia may have been the first to actually circle the globe and not Ferdinand Magellan? In a September 2019 article, the National Geographic raised the possibility that Enrique, a servant of Magellan, may have been the first to go around the world. But only little is known about him, whom some thought to be from the Philippines. In 1980, noted historian Carlos Quirino even proposed that Enrique was born in Carcar, Cebu. It was March 17, 1521, when Magellan and his men landed on Samar Island. There, they discovered that Enrique could communicate with the natives. But according to Filipino historian Victor Torres, Enrique was probably Malacan or Sumatran who knew the common language for trade at the time.
In a trade world like that, you need translators. But sometimes these natives who are in so much contact with each other would eventually learn to communicate using a mixture of languages that eventually became a trade language.
Enrique was believed to have been acquired by Magellan in 1511 in the Moluccas, present-day Indonesia. Torres says Enrique may be seen as a distant relative of ours from the Malay race.
Want to trace it back to the prehistoric times, so he probably came from those tradition race and everything. And he may have his ancestors, or probably, of course, of the same genetic makeup of like ours.
But if he had come home from another direction, he might have just gone around the world. Until today, people have recognized Enrique's voyage with a statue of him in the Maritime Museum of Malacca in Malaysia, while another one can be found at Singapore's Art Museum. In the end, no one will ever know who Enrique really was, but what we do know is he came back to the region he had called home. And for that reason alone, Enrique will always intrigue us. I'm Pamela Vasquez and we are One News.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories on print and online. All employees of the Jollibee Group will be getting COVID-19 jabs at no cost. This covers staff of restaurants Jollibee, Chowking, and Mang Inasal, among others, as well as other departments and the Jollibee Group Foundation. In a statement, Jollibee Group Chairman and Founder Tony Tan Kakyong said they are also looking to get more COVID-19 shots for employees' dependents and household members. In compliance to mobility curbs in NCR, the Philippine Stock Exchange will be closed beginning Thursday, March 25 until April 4. Business World Live reports that stock trading during the 2-week period may be done off-site. And this from News 5, the AFP Western Command found Monday 183 Chinese militia vessels at the Juan Felipe Reef off the West Philippine Sea. This number has gone down from the Philippine Coast Guard's initial sighting of 220 vessels on March 7. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana called on the Chinese government to recall their ships that are encroaching on Philippine territory.
In world news, over in the United States, a mass shooting at a supermarket in Colorado has left 10 people dead, including the first police officer to arrive on scene. Authorities arrested the suspected gunman, who was believed to be the only individual with serious injuries who survived the shooting. The bloodshed marked the second deadly U.S. mass shooting in a week following gun violence that left 8 people dead, including 6 Asian women at 3 locations in and around Atlanta.
For the big stories in sports, PBA Commissioner Willie Marshall denies that TNT Tropangiga's Bobby Ray Parks is banned from the league. Marshall says the PBA board did not issue any such order. This comes after Parks opted to sit out this season due to personal reasons. The PBA says it is looking into issues hounding the league, particularly on players' contracts. Filipino tennis ace Alex Ayala fell short in the first round of the Miami Open qualifiers, losing to Slovakian Victoria Kuzmova. Ayala found herself in a 0-2 hole early in the match before leveling up to secure the first set. However, Kuzmova soon overtook her in the second set and never looked back. Despite the loss, Ayala believes the setback is only part of her journey to professional tennis.
A tricycle driver in Maypaho, Caloocan is now in a viral video that shows that he's actually got some acting chops. In a CCTV footage, a motorcycle was seen slowing down as it approached a bump on the road, but while doing so, a speeding tricycle crashed onto its rear. The motorist got ejected, the passengers alighted the trike, and the tricycle driver, well, some say he tried to play possum. One of the passengers tried to wake him up, but as they say, mahirap gisingin ang nagtutulog-tulugan. The acting prowess of the driver got everyone's attention for 30 minutes until an ambulance arrived. The driver, found out to be drunk, rose from the dead for fear of being brought to a funeral home instead. Both parties have reached an agreement.
Hindi matay siya sa takot.
Mahirap naman talaga, oh.
Bawal magtulog-tulugan. Pero we can do that in the future. Wag na, wag. Something to lighten up all the seriousness of everything that's happening. That wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Gretchen Ho, and we are One News. Have a good evening.
Good evening.